Hi, everybody. Hello. So the homework is going to work like this. We're going to ask you, we're going to teach you something, but before we actually teach it to you, we want to see like what you'd be able to do even if we didn't teach it to you. So we're going to ask that at times we're going to ask you a question, then you're going to pause the video and try it on your own. Best way to learn. And then I'm going to go over it. I'm going to tell you exactly how you did, what you should have answered. And then after we're done with that, we're going to ask you a second question. And that's the question you're going to actually have to pick the right answer on this Edpuzzle. And that's the question that if you get it right, you get it right. If you get it wrong, you get it wrong. And you can always go back and review what we did together. But do yourself a favor, and when we ask you the first question, pause the video and then try it on your own. All right? So the first question we're going to ask you, so this would be the perimeter of, and I'm just telling you the question, the perimeter of a triangle and the side lengths. So the very first thing I want to ask you is, if this function was the function f, the side length and the perimeter and how they interrelate is function f. And let's say, for example, if you had a triangle with a side length of 2, so that would be right in here, it would be a 6 for perimeter, okay? My question would be, is this function f, would you label this f of 2 is equal to 6, or would you label this f of 6 is equal to 2? All right, so pause the video, make a decision, all right, and then replay it when you're ready. So hopefully you said that because the x-axis is the side length, in this case, the perimeter is a function of the side length. So the function equals the perimeter, which means the perimeter would be the equals whatever is the answer, and the inside the parentheses would be the x, which would be the side length. So in this case, the point is 2, 6, so this would be the correct way to say it. Another thing that you want to be able to do is, I'm going to scroll down a little, is you have to be able to also write an equation for this. When you write an equation, so like I know that if I make a equilateral triangle, by the way, equilateral triangle means that all sides are the same. If it has a side of 2, 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6. If it has a side of 4, 4 plus 4 plus 4 would be 12. So that would be the point 412. And if it had a side length of 6, 6 plus 6 plus 6 would be 18. And you're going to notice that it forms a straight line because it is a function, okay? You could probably connect this with a line because there is, you could use decimal side lengths like 2.1, 2.1, and 2.1. So eventually you'd have a straight line, but you also have to be able to write an equation. So how would you go from x to y? So sometimes we make a little bit of a x and y. So it goes from 2 to 6. It goes from, what do we say, 4 to 12. And it goes from 6 to 18. So you have to look at these points. And the question is, what is the relationship? What's happening to every x? And hopefully you're noticing. Oh, we'll go ahead and pause it. What would be, can you go ahead and write what you think the equation would be? So hopefully you guys said that the equation was, so it looks like x is being multiplied by 3 every time, which makes sense. There's 3 sides. So how would you write this function? Go ahead and pause the video and write the function. So now you would write, in this case, if it's x, you really could have used whatever the variable would, maybe used s for side length, but f of x equals 3x. Because to equal f of x is the y. In order to get to y, you'd have to do 3 times x. Now, if you use side length, the variable as s, it'd be the same thing. You would just say f of s equals 3s. You wouldn't use an x anymore. You would use an s. Okay? Now, a couple questions that we could ask you. Like, for example, we could say to you, like, what's, f of 8? Well, you'd have to go over to 8 and go up to whatever the answer would be, which would be 24. We could also ask you questions like f of x is equal to, let's say 9. Well, what would that be? Well, you'd have to think about, like, what would you multiply by 3 to get an answer of 9? This is saying the function equals 9. So in that case, f of 9, where I'd go on the y-axis, where is the 9? It'd be right here, and you go down, it's 3. So x would have to equal 3, and to write that in function notation, you would say f of 3, the function of putting in a 3, would equal 9. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and ask you, actually for that one I might not ask you a question to get graded. but this one I will. So functions f and a are labeled by these equations. So you can see that this is the function f because it has an f out in front. This one has an a. The question is, which function has a greater value when x is 2.5? So go ahead and pause the video and answer that question. So hopefully what you said was, so x is 2.5. You're just putting in a 2.5 there and solving it. And you're putting in a 2.5 there and solving it. So function a of 2.5 would actually get you 50 because if you 10 times 2.5 is 25, 25 plus 25 is 50. F of 2.5, if you plug in a 2.5, you'd have 15 times 2.5, which gets you 37.5, and 80 minus 37.5 will get you 42.5. All I did was plugged in a 2.5, and you can see that function a is greater when x is 2.5. Okay. What I'd like you guys to do right now is, which function is greater, a or f, but when x is 10? Actually, and by the way, completely take that back. I'm actually going to change that problem. I totally messed up. Sorry about that. What function is greater, the a function, which is this one, or the f function, which is this one, when x, and please don't get confused. I did write the a on the left, but please remember that that a is actually on the right and f is on the left. So when x is 1, which function is greater? All right. So now we're going to do perimeter again. This is a question kind of like the one that we just had. An equilateral triangle has 3 sides of equal length. So you're dealing with triangles that are completely the same length on all 3 sides. And the perimeter of an equilateral triangle of side length s. Okay. And they're calling this function p. Okay. So find p of 2. Okay. And do that. And hopefully you said, we kind of already did this one. P of 2 is equal to, when it says find P of 2, it's asking what is the answer when you put in a 2 for x. Remember, when you put in a 2 for x, 2 plus 2 plus 2, you get an answer of, 6. Okay? So these ones we kind of already did. What I want you to do is, now I want you to make an equation, because P of s is not telling you what the x value is, so you have to make an equation. But I want you to be very careful because it's saying find how you would get P of s. Right? So hopefully on that last one, that was a little bit of a question for you. You would have said, because the s was in there, you would have said 3 times s. We kind of already did that one, so that was kind of a little bit of a gift, but that's how you would have done that one. All right, so I want you to ignore, I had to find a graph. I want you to ignore that this says x. It was in, this is always the x value. So this is the time in seconds, and this is the position or the distance, which is the y value, okay? So first of all, which one, if you had to say a function statement, which one would you say is a function of the other? Okay, go ahead and pause. So hopefully you said the distance, because distance is the y, is a function of time, because distance is going to depend on time. Right? Otherwise, you can't mix those up, because this is the one that depends on the other. As time goes on, your distance is going to go up or down. In this case, it's up. Right? So one thing we can ask you is, so this is the a function, this is the b function. Right now, just pause the video and say this out loud. What would you, and again, this is kind of going to be like an estimate. What's greater? B of x, because remember, it's the b function, or a of x. Which one is greater if you put in x of 10? Which function is greater? Right? So hopefully the way you figure this out, well, first of all, the answer was b. The b function is greater. How do you figure it out? Well, you go to 10, you go up, and you could see that the a is right here at 10 seconds, but the b is at this height at 10 seconds. And the b, I should have gone a little bit to the right, is a little bit higher. So the b function is greater. Okay. A couple questions we want to ask you now. What's greater, um, A of 0 or B of 0? And now we want to ask you what is the value of B of 10? Like, what does B of 10 actually equal? Yeah. So hopefully you went over to 10 up to B, and you would have said it's about, I think it's maybe about 22. I don't know. If you would have said, we'll give you I would have given you the answers that were close to it. Okay. Right. So what we want you to do right now is we want you to write two equations for these two situations: cell phone company C and company D. Okay. Go ahead and read this before you pause it, and then do it yourself, and then I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. So Rule C gives the monthly cost in dollars of using gigabytes of data on company C's plan. Rule D gives the monthly cost. So basically the cost is a function of the gigabytes of data. So first of all, it says G gigabytes. We're using G as the input, and D is the dollars that you get. So since the monthly cost is a function of, we're going to say, so first of all, Rule C, so I'll call it function C using G. How do we get there? So it says that it uses $10 per month, okay, plus $15 per gigabyte. So that means every time you have another gigabyte, you have to multiply by 15, and you have to add the $10 a month. D of G, which is data plan G, says the plan costs $80 per month. So that would be plus 80 just one time per month with unlimited data. So you don't actually pay anything except $80. Okay. So if we asked you after, let's say you used 10 gigabytes. So I'm going to say, which one is cheaper after 10 gigabytes? Well, that means, okay, so for function C, 10 gigabytes means we're putting a 10 in there. So 15 times 10 is 150. 150 plus 10 is 160. So you would say C of 10, which means after 10 gigabytes, this one's going to cost $160. Well, for C of 10, or sorry, for D of 10, well, the function will always equal $80. So you know this one equals 80. Okay? So if you use 10 gigabytes, it's actually better for you to use the plan for data company D. Now, what I want you guys to do right now is, can you decide which one is greater? C of 2, if you use 2 gigabytes, or D of 2. Which one would be the greater value? Okay, which one would be more? Not which plan would you choose, which one would be more? Because obviously you would choose the cheaper plan, but which plan would be more? So hopefully you realize that after 2 gigabytes, it's actually cheaper to pick plan C. So this is something that would, in the real world, you kind of figure out at what point, how many gigabytes do you use? And depending on that, you might choose, if you use a lot of gigabytes, you might use plan D. But if you only use like 2 gigabytes, 3 gigabytes, I have to admit, I don't exactly know, I know megabytes, and I know that it's an amount of data. I don't exactly know how big a gigabyte is, and if that's a lot or a little. I'm sure you guys are better at that than I am. But you would really have to decide which one works. Okay. And for these things, I want you to answer this and then wait for me, but go ahead and answer this. So write a sentence describing the meaning of the statement. So hopefully you paused it, answered all 3 questions, and it's based on the thing we said above. Remember, I'll put it up. I'll put it over here actually so that you can see it. 15G plus 10, and then D of G is 80. Okay, so write a sentence describing the meaning of the statement. So this statement would mean that at 2 gigabytes, it cost company C $40. What is less, C of 4 and D of 4? Okay, so this is a question that we're going to ask you right now. You could put it in the thing because we've already kind of covered this. And for what number of C of G is 130? Okay, so this is something new. So remember, this is saying that the function equals 130. So we're going to take our equation, 15G plus 10, And we're going to set it equal because we know that it equals 130. So you're just going to solve this like a normal equation. Subtract 10 on both sides. And that is 15g equals 120. And then we're going to divide 120 by 15 because on both sides. Because you're going to divide by 15. And that means that if we know that it cost G, which is the amount of gigabytes, had to equal 8, which means if you spent 130 on plan C, it was you definitely used 8 gigabytes. Right? Hold on one second. Hopefully that made sense. And the last thing, I think this is the last thing we're going to do. So let me ask you one question first about the last question. All right. So we're going to go back to this so you can see both of the functions right here at the top. And so what I would like to know is, can you tell us what C of G equaling 100, what that would be? How many gigabytes would you have had to use? Okay. So the interesting thing about D is we couldn't ask you a question like that because we couldn't say at how many gigabytes would you have spent $80 because it's always $80. You actually wouldn't know the answer. So that's why I keep asking you questions about this. And the last thing, this is actually going to be on our next quiz. So it's really something that I want you to try first. Function G represented by the graph. For what input value is G of X for? Go ahead and answer that because I think some of you are going to make a mistake or get stuck on one of them. Okay. So this is function G. You can see it's not a line. We call this a quadratic function. You didn't have to know that already, but you might already know it's a quadratic function. This is called the parabola. So G of X equals 4 means the function equals 4, which means the Y value is 4. Well, right here is a Y of 4. So where does this parabola, which is the line, it's not a line, it's a parabola. Where does the parabola have a Y of 4? Well, it actually has it twice. Once there and once there. So you could have said X equals, there's actually two answers, X equals 2, but also X equals negative 2. Okay, and those are the two answers for when G of X equals 4. Can you guys answer two questions for me? One, what is G of 4 in this particular function? And two, well, we'll let you do that first. And there's a second question I got to ask you. And what is G of X? What value of X would make this function true, where G of X equals 8? Okay. Hope that helped. A lot of people had talked about they liked homework this way because you're kind of learning and doing it at the same time and seeing your answers if they're right or wrong. But hopefully that helped. All right. And we will see you. Please make sure if you guys have any questions for Wednesday, come on Wednesday. And then we also have reteach, reassess on Tuesday and Friday. But Wednesday, remember, you can follow your schedule and come on in.